So next up is Robert Kisteleki from RIPE NCC, who's going to talk about fun and games in the Baltic Sea with trawlers, cables.
Hello, I'm Robert. I work for the RIPE NCC, and I'm mostly the messenger here, although I work with the systems that help discovering these things. But I'm going to talk about the cable damages in the Baltic Sea and a little bit beyond as well, and what can be seen, what do we see in our systems, and what may be something that can help you also in the future. First of all, if you are interested in these kind of things, I encourage you to go to RIPE Labs every now and then. There's probably also a feed you can subscribe to where we publish regularly these kind of analyses and look into things, also guest posts. If you yourself wants to post something, just let us know and we'll make it happen. Emil's face on this slide is because he did the legwork here, so like 99% of the work is by him or him cooperating with others. And he's part of the research team at the RIPE NCC, so he's basically enjoying the outputs of the systems that we have. He's running with results and looking at interesting things. I am more, together with the Atlas team, we're the people who are actually running the systems behind it so that he can have fun. What I'm going to talk about in a large part are these events. So these are towards the end of last year and early this year. There were a number of cable cuts. Do I have a laser? Yes, I have a laser. In this region, as you probably all know. But this is the list of events that we looked at, and in a little bit more detail, we're going to look at the BCS East-West and the Sea Lion outage and what we see there. This was in the news, of course. So you probably have read all of this or most of this. There's a lot of speculation about whether these were cable cuts or just cable damages. For a while, we were trying to stay away from calling them cuts because maybe they are not. But the truth is, there was a good presentation at the RIPE meeting a couple of weeks ago where there was a naval officer, retired naval officer from Finland, who went into a lot of detail about how these ships actually work and what you can expect from a ship. I'm not a sailor myself, but I do believe him when he says actually dragging an anchor for 100 kilometers and not noticing it is a very unlikely event. So, you know, make your own conclusions. But the fact is, in this particular event, out of the 4 cables laid down between Finland and Estonia, 3 were cut, and also there's another cable, there's a power cable as far as I know. And this is a long distance, so you know, this happened. That's a fact. Okay, what do we see here? RIPE Atlas. So we are using RIPE Atlas for this analysis because that's the system that gives us most of this valuable data. I had a talk about this last year, RIPE Atlas in general, so if you're interested in the details, you can go back there and read and listen to that. But at the end of the day, we have presence in almost all of the countries, in many of the networks. Unfortunately, not enough, so I will come back to that. But at the moment, we have about 13,000 vantage points. So these are the Atlas probes, including the anchors, that can be used to measure from to a particular place. We have 850 anchors, and the anchors are also probes, but they're also willing destinations for traffic. So they are stable points in the internet. You know they exist, they are published. So if you want to measure something in a particular country, you can just see if there is an anchor there, and then it's willing to give you, at the minimum, TCP/IP responses, but HTTP DNS as well. So it's a little bit more than just TCP. And we run 35,000 daily measurements, but a bigger number, a nicer number that I like is we collect around 1.4 billion results each day. And all of that is available for coming back 15 years. So that's a big number. All right, more to the point, the anchor mesh. So the anchors, like the 850 of them or so, they are up and running, and they are constantly measuring each other. So they are involved in a full mesh. So that's if you think about it, it's an 850 times 850 matrix of sources and destinations. All of those measurements are ongoing with a frequency of 4 minutes for magical reasons. And it's happening using using ping and traceroute. There are some DNS and HTTP measurements as well, but we have a stable baseline for pings and traceroute measurements. So you can imagine that if there is a disturbance between any of those 2 points, we will probably see it. This is a very high frequency data, so if someone runs an anchor, I think the calculation comes out to something like 100 hertz or so signal that you actually get if you run one. All right, so let's see what we see. We're going to look at two particular events, the BCS East-West and Sea Lion cable cuts. For these, we are looking at 100 anchors in Germany because one of those lines was actually disrupting the communication between Germany and the Nordics. As you can see, 15 from Sweden, 12 from Finland, and a couple from Lithuania as well. The expectation is that all of these things are pinging and trace routing to each other, and if everything goes well, we have rock-solid packet loss, hopefully zero, and we have rock-solid baseline of RTTs. Well, we kind of did until something happened there. Approximately 8 o'clock on the 17th of November. So we're looking at, what you're looking at here is, the vertical axis is pairs of anchors. So this is something from Sweden going to Lithuania. This one is Sweden going to Lithuania. This one is, this is all Lithuania. Yeah, I think because that was the cable cut between, on that cable. But in the big scheme of things, there is a particular measurement going out because things are maybe symmetric, maybe not, probably not. And what you see here is the latency change and the packet loss change. So I think we subtract the minimum latency. Yes, so if the baseline latency is, say, 20 milliseconds between A and B, we subtract that baseline so that the changes are actually more visible. So the orange lines here are the latency changes, and do mind this is average increase, so this all of these involved. That's why the numbers are relatively low. But for each individual measurement, you can see that there is a very, very well identifiable starting point when the cable was cut, obviously. What we do see is that there is a latency increase, and it's very, very visible, but the packet loss really didn't change all that much, right? So there was, you know, every now and then there is packet loss on a cable, but it's not too bad, and it was slightly worse after the cut, but only slightly. So this is actually a very good situation to be in. And you can see that some of those pairs are affected way more than others. So obviously these were going through that cable, and probably these were not before the event, right? So zooming in a little bit on that one, we see, just like it said, there's a significant increase in latency, or a noticeable increase in latency, I should say, but packet loss was pretty okay. Looking at the other event, am I right? Yes, am I right? So this is the other event, the Sea Lion cut. Here you see Germany versus Finland, Germany versus Finland. I think all of these are, yeah. Again, the picture is basically the same, so there's a very, very distinct starting point. Packet loss didn't really change at all, and the latency increase is very visible. I'm not sure about this part. There's a different, this is probably a different problem, maybe one provider. I personally haven't looked at it, and I'm not sure what this is, but it's definitely not the cause, or not caused by the actual event. So that's when it started, actually just a day later. Here we actually also have the fixing, the repair of the cable. We know when it was reported to be fixed, and then you can see that, yep, those latencies that were higher than normal actually at the end of the process went back to normal. This is an interesting bit. This is, I think, reportedly when the cable was actually fixed. So there's an interesting disturbance in the force, so to speak. And we're also looking for input to people like, why can this be? I would imagine that when, you know, the ship just joins the two cables and there's this bzz, bzz period of events for, like, you know, 5 minutes or so, that's when that happens. But, you know, when that dies down, things are basically back to normal again, right? And you can see that for some routes, the event took a little bit longer, and this is probably BGP convergence, and then we're done, right? Okay. So conclusions. There's a relatively minor event in the sense of what the effect was for the actual internet, and the latencies and packet losses. And this is one of Emil's favorite statements: the internet routed around the damage. So it was actually visible that traffic just kept on flowing, the paths were changed, but otherwise, no big deal, except that people had to repair that cable. So that problem is still there. All right, something else. There was a power outage in Spain and Portugal just like the week before, or maybe 2 weeks before the RIPE meeting was there. So we looked at that as well. So this is a completely different picture. And I will try not to steal the next presentation's topics, because the Cloudflare will give you a different perspective on this. But what's very different here is a couple of things. One is, yeah, obviously latency increases when there is power outages and things have to reroute and the suboptimal routes are used and so on and so forth. A little bit of packet loss visible, but then it's quite normalizing. But where this gray bit is also interesting. So the gray bit is where we have no data, right? Keep in mind that these are anchors. So the anchors are usually deployed in the core network, so they are not on the very edge, they are not client, behind the home router and so on. These should be stable, and they should also have stable power. Now, that is true in most of the data centers, but when stuff happens, the data centers switch over to diesel, and at some point diesel runs out. Footnote: please check your contracts with your diesel supplier whether they will prioritize the local hospital or you. I suspect that they will prioritize the hospital. So, just make sanity checks about if this happens around here, how long will your data center last, and what is your contingency plan for that? But anyway, the gray bars is when we don't have data because these guys just lost power. And basically, they couldn't supply the data. Otherwise, if they are kept powered, but they disconnect from the internet, they are designed in such a way that they keep on measuring. Right? So as long as they are up, they will measure what's happening. And once the event is over, they supply all that data back to us when they can connect and can tell us what's happened. We collect all that data back and then put it back. So some of this data may have been delayed. It was collected, but then it was delayed later on. So when you look at all of these things, this is some timeline. And after the event is over, then we can have the full picture. But during the event, we can't. And it's actually particularly useful when you have an island where it just disconnects from the internet. So if we have probes or anchors inside that island, we see what the world looks like from the inside out. Right? Not immediately, but the next time these devices can connect back to us, they supply all that data, and then we see what the world looked like from the inside. And then another power outage, Chile. This was more recent, 25th of February. Again, the idea is the same. What's more visible is that something else was also going on, but it's very visible when the actual event happened, when we didn't have data. All right, switching gears. Everything that I told you so far was about pings, right? And pings are useful. They have their own limitations. Never mind the throttling of ICMP and so on. That also happens. But they also only give you really the RTT and basically a Boolean value. Did you get there or not? And if so, how fast? Versus traceroute data. So traceroute, as we all know, it tries to figure out how the packets go. And the anchor mesh also uses traceroutes. So we have looked into this, and I'm not going to go into all of these details. I recommend you go back to the labs articles. There's pages and pages of interesting and gory details if you want. But in the big scheme of things, when there is a change in routing, there are three major categories, and I assume that you probably know this better than I do, but let me explain anyway. The interdomain rerouting is where basically the path between A and B, so these are the two endpoints, used to be something along an AS path, and that AS path changes because different providers are involved. And in this picture, even an IXP is there. That's kind of normal. There's another category when within the network, the AS path changes. So we can see still this in the data because traceroutes, when you map them the particular hops to IP to AS numbers, that gives you this data as well. And then the third one is where we only see latency changes within an AS. Right? That's still a change. It's probably an underlying network, maybe MPLS, maybe other switches, happening. But these three categories are basically identifiable in such an event. Again, the baseline assumption here is that you have a stable network or a stable connection between A and B, and the disturbance is something that you actually want to notice and explain. So researchers went in and tried to analyze how many of those path changes were caused by which of these categories. And I really encourage you, look into the details on RIPE Labs if you're interested. Something entirely different, because just giving you a different perspective on what kind of things can be observed. At some point, unfortunately, there was in early March, mid-March, a submarine landslide, so an undersea landslide, basically around the coast of Africa. And that coast is one where there are a lot of cables going around Africa for reasons, carrying a lot of traffic between Africa and probably also from the Far East towards Europe, basically. And such a landslide is also visible. Yes, this one. There is visibly way more packet loss happening here. Well, here we looked at connectivity between South Africa, so with the UK. So these are pairs from UK to South Africa, basically. Okay. And then you can see a lot of packet loss, obviously, because in this case, it's way more harder to actually reroute the packets to a different path, and maybe that the alternative path is actually overloaded as well. So I fully expect that we will publish more of similar analyses when events happen. But at the end of the day, we can see that the internet routes around damage as much as it can. So the original design, so to speak, is actually achieved, the original design goal. But this kind of resilience is not guaranteed. It depends on whether there are alternative paths, whether they are overloaded, or maybe everyone is now jumping onto the single alternative that exists. So we don't know. From the perspective of measuring this, we have to keep monitoring, measuring in order to understand. So in order to do that, we need the vantage points, right? You can't see something where you don't have vantage points, you don't have eyes in that particular region. So in that sense, the more vantage points we can have, the better. And I think this map is only for the anchors. So there are quite a number of them, but you do see some white spots in particular areas where there is not many people living, so that's totally fine. But what we are really looking for is where there is actual internet usage on a large enough scale so that the events can be observed and looked at. And then if you want to join this effort, you can. It's actually relatively easy to run a RIPE Atlas anchor with all the benefits, including the one that we can use the data to actually analyze these events. So just a quick outlook. This is present in South America. I think we can say that we are relatively close to the bigger, the higher density populations. Also Asia, these are the active anchors, and the slides are available. So these are countries and how many anchors and so on we have. Africa would be really nice. This is probably not the network operators group that can help us deploying more anchors in Africa, but if you can, appreciate it. And Europe is pretty well covered. It looks like Spain, Portugal, and France could use a little bit more. But if you imagine where the higher population density is, that would make sense to have more anchors. So that's basically our target, Middle East. And then because we are here in Tampere, I added a slide about showing you where the anchors are in this region. And I guess you guys can tell me if there would be a reason to have anchors in Lapland or not. But in general, Helsinki, Tampere, and Finland are quite okay. If you have more networks in the regions where we don't, that would be appreciated as well. And I think that's my story. And I even have time for some questions if you want.
Thank you, Robert. Do we have a question?
Yes. Hello, Joni Nurmetsa from Elisa Interconnectivity. My team manages the Elisa international footprint. So how do you separate? You talked about the December outages, and you said or you talked about Cinia specifically. How do you separate the other two cable cuts from that, or do you not?
Going back. You mean these?
No, the December cuts. So if you go, I think it's slide number 4.
Let me just do that.
Here we go.
Sea Lion one. Yes.
You talk about Sea Lion, but it was actually several cables, not just Sea Lion.
Yeah, that's quite. That's a really good question, and it's a really difficult one because what we can observe, and in theory anyone can observe if you start doing the internet measurements. You don't need Atlas for that, but we have in our footprint. What we can observe is the network layer. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Layer 2 is whatever happens below. In particular, where the traffic went through a particular cable and now it doesn't. We cannot know that. We can infer that from the latency changes, right? And whether that was a change from one of the cables of Sea Lion 1 and then to the other, or there was a completely different cable used, I don't think we know. The point here is more that there was an alternative, and the alternative was not bad.
Right. So this represents the whole Finnish market rather than just the Sea Lion customers.
I think that's correct, yes.
Thank you.
Aleksi from Finland again. So a bit of a follow-up question to the previous one. So for the east-west cables, you also had traceroute analysis, but for Sea Lion, I guess you didn't make the traceroute analysis.
You can look at RIPE Labs. I think there is analysis on both.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
Thank you again, Robert.
Thank you very much.
Robert is a long-time return speaker. I'm not going to embarrass him by telling you how many times, but quite a few.
I don't know.
He's been
Lost
coming,
count.
I think, for as long as I have.
Lost count, yes. I'm here also for the sound out part, so if you want to discuss these things or anchors or anything else, then you know where to find me. Thank you.
Thank you again, Robert.